We are going to keep things on time and we're going to get started. So I just want to say good evening, everybody. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Maureen Folk, and I'm the Outreach and Program Coordinator at the Chapman Museum. If you haven't done so already, but I think everybody has, I'm going to ask that you mute your microphones for the talk. Thank you all for joining us tonight and for another talk in our series, Conversations with the Past. This series is held on the second Wednesday of each month, so be sure to check out our website for more information. Tonight, we are honored to have Dr. Einav Rabinovich-Fox. Dr. Rabinovich-Fox teaches U.S. and women's and gender history at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. Her research examines the connections between fashion, politics, and modernity, particularly how visual and material culture have shaped and reflected class, gender, and racial identities. Excuse me, I'm just going to let a few more people in. Her book, Dressed for Freedom: The Fashionable Politics of American Feminism, explores women's political uses of clothing and appearance to promote feminist agendas during the long 20th century. Her writing has been published in both scholarly journals and books, as well as in popular media such as The Washington Post, The Conversation, Public Seminar, and NPR. You can follow her on Twitter also at Dr. Einav R. Fox. So thank you all for joining us tonight. And without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to you, Dr. Rabinovich-Fox, and for her talk, Dressed for Freedom: The Politics of Fashion in American History.
Thank you, Maureen, and thank you for the Chapman Museum. I'm glad to be here, even if virtually. It's nice to be here and to kind of like have all of you Black squares with me. But it's really nice to have those conversations. So I really want to thank Maureen for organizing this. I'll go ahead and share my screen before we continue. Just a moment. So my talk today, as Maureen said, will focus on the connection between fashion and politics that are really in the center of my book, Dress for Freedom: The Fashionable Politics of American Feminism, and especially how feminism was an integral part of the feminist movement during the long 20th century. We are now in Women's History Month. Yesterday was International Women's Day, so it's a very appropriate topic. I'll do kind of like before we plunge in, I'll do a quick moment of self-promotion and let you know that you can purchase my book today or in the couple of days. There will be, I put links in the chat if you want, and also after the talk. You can use 30% off if you go to the press website. It's here, and put the code F21UIP. If you want a signed book, that's kind of like, the bad parts of virtual talks. Just shoot me an email or contact me. I'll have my info after the talk, and I'll send you, give me your address, and I'll send you a bookplate, a signed bookplate, free of charge. So feel free to buy the book and have it all. So after this, a moment of self-promotion, let's dwell in. And fashion, as you know, has immense political importance, and especially now, far from being frivolous or marginal issue, right? We saw, especially last week, right, in the State of the Union address, how fashion was central to the political discourse. So as Congress, women and men dressed in yellow and blue, Representative Maloney dressed in like a traditional Ukraine shirt, and really to show their solidarity through their fashion and to convey political messages. And fashion really have that power. And just like today, also in the past, and appearance were central to women's ability to venture into public space and to gaining a public voice in this, in public, and power in public. So using fashion to convey political messages is definitely not something of the last couple of years, even though it seems so like that. And as the suffragist and feminist Mary Alden Hopkins argued in 1921, votes and jobs and citizenship have not lessened for women one jot the importance of clothes, because women found clothing important, because they are expression of her sex, because her clothes are a second self, Hopkins explained. Clothing and appearance were central to the ways in which women expressed their freedom and independence in the post-suffrage years. Yet Hopkins' observation was not only relevant to the 1920s. As we have seen in the last couple of years, in the cultural arena to express and to promote feminist ideas of freedom, independence, and equality, allowing to challenge and redefine notions of femininity and gender roles. Just recently in the Met Gala, we also saw examples of that. How fashion can serve as a powerful political statement, whether it was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's Text to Reach dress or Caroline Maloney Votes for Women's dress, fashion proved to be a great way to promote feminist ideas and political agendas. The fact that these outfits were also meant to symbolize the gala theme of American independence only strengthened the connection between fashion and American politics. And there's a long history for Americans using fashion in political ways, which I hope to touch tonight. So my book, again, explores these topics and examining the multiple ways in which women engage with fashion during the long 20th century. Without denying the oppressive nature of fashion to women that definitely exists, or disregarding feminist critiques of fashion, I show how development in clothing design and manufacturing provided women, especially those who were barred from positions of power due to their class or race, with accessible means to shape modern ideas of gender and sexuality and to claim a more equal place in the public sphere. The book traces the sartorial practices of both well-known activists and ordinary women, representing various backgrounds and experiences, working class and middle class, Black and white, urban and suburban, those who defined themselves as feminist and those who did not. These women, by adopting and adapting the mainstream styles, turn fashion into a useful mean to promote feminist agenda and to redefine feminist politics. And feminism has a long and often fraught relationship with fashion. And in fact, the most known example of this relationship is what we call the fashion disaster of the bloomer episode of the 1850s. What began as a dress reform initiative to free women from cumbersome skirts and trailing skirts turned to be a PR fiasco. There's no way of sugarcoat that. For the women's rights advocate, such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who eventually abandoned this outfit and preferred to wear a more conventional dress when they preached for suffrage. Both contemporaries and women's rights advocates themselves saw the bloomer as a statement against fashion and as a political tool to challenge gender hierarchies. And as a result, feminism itself was understood as opposing fashion, consolidating the image of the anti-fashionable, ugly, masculine feminist for generation to come. And you can see in those illustrations how the bloomer become kind of like a visual substitute to the feminist as a way, as a backlash to also those ideas and what, God forbid, will happen if women will get the vote. But the bloomer was not the only fashion image that defined women's relationship with feminism. By the late 19th century, with the rise of mass media and culture, feminists, unlike the 1850s bloomer, did not reject the mainstream fashion, but sought to use them as a way to carve spaces of power, pleasure, and freedom. These women did not just seek clothes that would allow greater comfort and mobility, but they also want that these styles would be popular, or in other words, fashionable. In their clothing practice, as my book shows, they were able to challenge the myth that a commitment to women's rights and freedom could not go together with adornment practices and beauty. Instead, they turned fashion into an everyday feminist practice, contriving a new and more positive relationship of feminism with fashion. And while the chapters in my books are organized somewhat chronologically from around 1890s to the 1970s, the books does not trace the development of a feminist style during the 20th century, mostly because there isn't one. There is no one style that we can say, oh, this is what feminists wore. Instead, each chapter focused on a specific fashionable moment that highlights different aspects of how women used fashion to express gender, racial, and class identities, as well as to promote feminist agenda. And again, while it would be impossible to talk about one feminist style or feminist look, there are several themes that my book addresses that I would also would like to address today. And again, there's no one thing, but there are themes that we can see throughout the 20th century. And these are utility and comfort, the battle over skirts hemlines, that women like them short, let's say that way, and also the issue of respectability and politics. So looking at utility and comfort, we have to remember that women's clothing and dress changed significantly during the period the book examines. These transformations include moving from custom or homemade clothing to mass-produced and ready-made ones, from complicated constructions tailored to a specific body to simple silhouettes manufactured according to standardized sizes. And for formal wear, designated to specific events and occasions, to multi-purpose wear to wear the entire day. Some of these changes corresponded with feminist initiative of making clothes more comfortable and functional, moving the focus from an emphasis on form to an emphasis on utility. And indeed, even the goal of the reviled bloomer was to provide women with more convenient attire that allows movement and comfort. Yet unlike the bloomer costume, the new fashions that feminists found attractive were mainly promoted by the growing ready-made industry and its search for profit. And we don't need necessarily think about the fashion industry as an ally, and they were not always an ally, but at least in the early 20th century, simpler silhouettes were easier and cheaper to manufacture, did make them an ally to a certain point and to a certain degree, and feminists certainly use that. And they did, when they tried to promote their own ideas about fashion, the fashion industry, sometimes not, but at least in the early 20th century was much more on their side than not. That helped them a lot, again, to push the ideas that the mainstream fashion can also be feminist. The most evident example of the popularization of this idea of utility and comfort was the popularization of the shirtwaist in the late 19th and early 20th century. Modeled after the male dress shirt, the shirtwaist really revolutionized the ready-made industry, becoming one of the first female fashion items to be mass-produced. Unlike complicated structured dresses, which needed to be fitted to the individual body, the shirtwaist did not require close fitting and hence was much easier to standardize, both in terms of styles and in sizes. Change into styles was very subtle and easy to update without investing a lot in production costs, but by adding embroidery or pleats or gusset into the shirt. The shirtwaist was marketed as suitable for all occasions, to work, shopping, afternoon wear, and was particularly appealing to wage-earning women who could appear to have a diverse wardrobe without investing large funds. The versatility of the shirtwaist allow women to construct different outfits by using one skirt and several shirtwaists or vice versa, and all tailored to the wearer taste and financial resources. Perhaps most importantly, the availability of this ensemble also contribute to a new conception of the female body that was much more athletic and mobile. And with the increasing participation of women in sports and leisure, the shirtwaist and the skirt ensemble, now model as a combination of a shirtwaist and a relatively short bicycle shirt, as you can see here in the image of the Gibson girl that really becomes popular in this time, constructed not only a new experience for women, but also a modern understanding of womanhood. And difference in quality and durability were certainly obvious between store-bought shirtwaist and a custom-made one, and among manufactured shirtwaist in different grades. Yet the ability of the shirtwaist to cross class and racial barriers, and so the shirtwaist becomes this uniform for the American woman, and its ability to cross racial and class barriers made it extremely useful for women who were marginalized to use it as a claim for their participation in American culture as equals. African-American women, in particular, use the shirtwaist and its association with collegiate culture and with middle-class respectability to promote racial equality and inclusion in American society. By appearing fashionable and up-to-date style that matched the mainstream trends, Black women were able to present a new model of femininity that challenged racist stereotypes in the white media while simultaneously redefining Black womanhood and making it modern. And you can see here in the image of Mary Church Terrell, of these students from Atlanta University, how they incorporating this image of the Gibson girl and make them their own. Working class white immigrants, many of them worked in the garment industry making those shirtwaists, also capitalized on the shirtwaist popularity in their claims for inclusion and status as workers. Indeed, more than anything, the shirtwaist symbolized working class women politicized presence in the workforce. Clara Lemlich, for example, who was a shirtwaist maker and a union activist, who was one of the leaders of the famous 1909 garment worker strikes, also known as the uprising of the 20,000, utilized the shirtwaist imagery to make claims for her right to be respected, both as a woman, but also as a worker. And by demanding her right to be acknowledged as a fashionable woman, Lemlich and her peers intertwined ideas of fashionability and femininity with their demands for working rights. And the shirtwaist would remain a popular fashion trend until the end of the 1910s, yet its popularity as well as this association with Americanism that was very important to these garment workers would reverberate and would continue for decades to come. By the 1930s, the shirt will have a comeback, this time as a one or two pieces dress for women. And the shirtwaist dress of the 30s and 40s would be one of the most important staples of what we call the sportswear style, that will be a specific American look that will be popularized by young female fashion designers who saw themselves as designing clothes by women for women and capturing this idea of American freedom and American look. These designers will popularize sportswear that will become a new category for casual daytime clothing, what we now maybe will call athleisure wear, although it's much more, as you can see from the images, much more formal than athleisure wear. And that was part of the idea that it wasn't, sportswear were not something that you wear for sports. It's something that you could wear for work or wear for your everyday, busy life, but also will maintain your femininity, your beauty, and really, I mean, it is a period that I think we all want to wear these clothes. I want to wear these clothes, but it really is kind of like encapsulating this idea of movement, functionality, accessibility, but also a feminine look. And the shirtwaist dress of the 30s and 40s would be celebrated as the modern incarnation of the 1890s shirtwaist. So there is definitely those connections that are being made. And this reference alluded to the longevity and the resonance of expressing ideas and feminist ideas through fashion. Just as the shirtwaist in the 1890s represented Americanism and female determination, the same ideas were relevant to a generation of women that were mobilized during World War II, that were also fighting for better fashion, but also for better jobs and for better rights. Beyond the shirtwaist, another important fashion item that represented the expression of feminist ideas through fashion was the incorporation of pockets into women's wear, something that I think many women will identify as a need and a feminist cause even today for women's fashion. That's certainly a struggle still continuing. Pockets were long considered to be a utilitarian element in clothing, but by the 1890s, they became associated with a feminist rallying cry for rights. One woman described pockets as women's greatest lack and the biggest hindrance for women's progress. According to her, the lack of pockets in women's clothes not only made carrying items such as handkerchiefs, pocketbook, and journals a nuisance, but it also was a barrier for women's intellectual and professional development. Unlike men, she argued, who can carry in their pockets books or magnifying glass and to enrich their world, women were forced into carrying heavy bags that hindered their movement and their ability to explore the world. And, as someone who also have a heavy bag, I, for one, relates very much to this argument. But by 1913, pockets would become a metaphor for women's rights and for suffrage. The suffragist Alice Duer Miller, in her series column, Are Women People, published in 1914, a short piece titled, Why We Oppose Pockets for Women. And in it, Miller mockingly detailed anti-suffragist arguments, substituting the word vote in pockets in order to really be of those arguments, right? And those demands. And you can see here kind of like, and it's kind of like funny, right? Of how she situate pockets and suffrage on the same round. But this association of pockets with suffragist agitation for the vote really became so prevalent that every outfit that contained multiple pockets was deemed to be a suffrage costume. So it could be a suffrage dress or a suffrage jacket or whatever contained with pockets was marketed as a suffrage item. So really, and I think pockets is kind of like a sore point, but it was something that feminists did connect it to their own political freedom as well. So the next kind of like issue is, of course, skirts hemline, and the search for some functionality and comfort, did not stop at pockets and shirtwaist. And another issue, and again, another theme that my book addresses is women continuing effort to free their legs by wearing short skirts that allow them this freedom of movement. And the problem of long and trailing skirts was in the center of concerns in the 19th century, partly because streets and roads were much more dirtier than they used to be. Even don't believe what you see in the Gilded Age in the show. The streets there are much more cleaner than they should be. Streets were very dirty, and long skirts were really a health hazard for many women. The bloomer costume, which contained a relatively short skirt, was an attempt to solve that problem. But the bloomer failed to gain much support. By the late 1890s, much due to the popularity of cycling, the public was more open to the sight of women in short skirt. Sometimes bloomers are still kind of like very controversial, but shorter skirts were more acceptable because of biking. And it's important to kind of like, when I say short skirt, right, it does seem short to a 19th century person, not necessarily to us. So in 1896, a group of business women from New York City founded the Rainy Day Club to advocate for shorter skirts, not just for cycling, but also for everyday wear. And seeing the comfort that the short skirt afforded women in riding their bicycles, these women who needed to walk out and about in city streets view it as a potential solutions to the problems and ills of trailing skirts. They designed an outfit that really resembled much of the bloomer costume, but that did not have visible trousers and hence did not garner much resistance. That outfit included, again, short skirts, and at that time, boot height did consider to be short, reaching somewhat between 4 and 6 inches above the ground, a short jacket, a high boot. And club members argued that this outfit is not just an answer for poor health, especially on rainy days, and hence the name, but it was a beautiful outfit that helped them to convey their own sense of accomplishment as active career women. And while the fashion industry did embrace the rainy day outfit to a certain degree, there was a few advertisements here and there, women will have to wait 2 more decades until short skirts really will enter the mainstream. In this case, it was the young, liberated flapper that pushed for shorter skirts as a symbol of her newly political and social freedom. And as young women demanded to celebrate their sexuality, and political rights, right? By 1920, women can vote. The fashion industry reacted by providing loose and rectangular dresses that allowed for movement and mobility, and also exposed women's knees for the first time in history. And as you can see, although skirts length did fluctuate throughout the decade, by 1925, skirts began their constant rise until they settled around the knee in 1926. And women stuck to the short skirt because it enabled them freedom, but also because it symbolized for them their new presence in the public sphere. And when the industry attempted to push for longer length in the late 20s, resisted, organizing against lengthening their skirts. Rather than just to accept the industry decree, a heated battle erupted between those who favored the change in styles and women who saw it as an attack on their political and sartorial freedom. Using their power as consumers and their new positions as fashionable trendsetters, these women pushed against calls to alter their style, turning their fashion into a site of political activism. For these women, many proclaimed, feminists among them, the debate over skirts length was not just about a fashion trend, but about what and who defined femininity. Women began boycott campaign against the long skirt that reached beyond feminist and urban circles, reaching far west to Washington, and crossing class and racial lines as well. One woman in LA even filed for a divorce after she wanted to wear her skirts and her husband refused. And these women really articulated their demands, not as a protection of style, but as you can see from this quote, as a protection of rights. As one flapper argued, would we passively give up the vote or any other rights finally obtained after long struggles? Then why give up the comfort, economy, and freedom of movement, which the short skirts have meant to us? By conflating women's skirts with political rights, Flapper demonstrated that women's freedom did not necessarily lie in political participation or in access to education and jobs, but also in wearing comfortable clothing that allowed physical mobility. These flappers translated ideas of political freedom into sartorial expression, using their clothing to carve up new spaces of power and influence. And while skirts for evening wear did get long in the 1930s, skirts for everyday wear remained fairly short, reaching up to 4 inches below the knee. And although the variety of these skirts length alluded to the difficulty of feminists to completely resist the fashion industry, their struggle nonetheless proved that the fashion industry did not have complete control over women's tastes, looks, or consumers' decisions. Indeed, if the industry thought that freedom would be a fading trend that could be changed according to manufacturing or designers' whim, women proved that they were willing to fight for their political gains, whether it was their political representation or the length of their skirts. And the battle of the skirts of the late 20s were only the first round when women connected their rights to wear short skirt with their political rights. When in the late 1940s, Christian Dior would present his new look, American women once again would fight and to continue to wear comfortable clothing. Revolt against the new look centered in Texas, where women banded together to form little below the knee clubs to protest your style, declaring that the Alamo fell, but our hemlines will not. These protesters framed their resistance in political terms, again, arguing that the long skirt of the new look was an attack on their freedom and on democracy. Some argued it was not the length of the skirt so much as its width, and which due to the volume curtailed free movement and posed a real health hazard. Others complained that the new look put financial burden on women during the post-war economic downturn. In the face of opposition, Dior himself accommodated his design to the US market, and in later collection, he reduced the fullness of the skirt and even added pockets. His American dresses also weighted less and had fewer hooks and eyes, so they were easier to don. And by 1950, Dior dropped the new look in favor of slimmer silhouette and shorter skirts. These accommodations and the eventual abandonment of the new look attested to the power of women consumers who demanded comfortable clothing for themselves and got it. Women continued to fight for their sartorial freedom also during the 60s, as many women would adopt the new style of the miniskirts, seeing it as the epitome of the sexual revolution and their new sexual freedom. In 1970, when the fashion industry would push to replace the mini with the midi style, women all across the country, just like their grandmothers in the 1920s, would organize to protest against the new length. Where women were not oblivious to the economic interest behind the shifts in styles, they interpreted the move as an attack on their personal freedom and on the right to choose, and choice really becomes this important word for the feminist movement in the 60s and 70s. And these women are really connected to the right to choose what they wear with the right to choose sexual partners, when did they get pregnant, and all other elements that connected with the word choice. So these women founded organizations like FAD, Fight Against Dictating Designers, and POOF, which is Preservation of Our Femininity and Finances, that circulated petitions and organized demonstrations, boycotts, and direct actions, like you can see in the middle picture, of clip-ins, which were inspired by the sit-ins, in which they would come with their mini and cut it with their scissors. And while not all these women would identify as radical feminists, these tactics, as well as their connection between their clothes and their political rights, turned fashion into a realm of feminist activity. By the late 1970s, it was evident that the protest was a success. Minis stayed in fashion and midis disappeared. And for many women, the choice was no longer between a midi and a mini, but between mini and pants. And I had a picture of pants, but it disappeared. And pants themselves becoming an important political statement. So whereas the battle over hemlines certainly had political aspects and was a way to turn fashion into a political arena of feminist activism, clothes were also used in political campaign and to make a direct political statement. Most famously, suffragists were extremely savvy in their own use of fashion during their campaign for women's rights. Thinking their political message would be more palatable if delivered by attractive messengers, suffragists emphasized their fashionable taste and feminine appearance, claiming that their adherence to fashion was a testament for their worthiness as voters. Suffragists also cleverly used color in their campaigns, turning the suffrage colors of white, purple, and yellow into part of their brand. Through the emphasis on color, together with careful attention to arrangements and portrayal of their womanly talent of embroidery and fashion, while marching in their costumes and handmade banners, suffragists managed to assert their political presence in what was considered to be a male territory. And the use of color also enabled activists who were excluded from the mainstream movement due to their class or race to claim their stick as partners in the cause. As white dresses were easier and cheaper to attain than colored ones, women could use their support or show their support for the suffrage cause by wearing an ordinary white dress and adding a purple or yellow accessory. And especially for African-American women, adopting the suffrage colors and fashion elements like the shirtwaist offered them access to the privilege of ladyhood that many of their white upper and middle class suffragists enjoyed. Black suffragists in particular also capitalized on the color white that was associated with sexual morality and purity, qualities that were long deprived from African-American women in public discourse, to show that they too were honorable women. By dressing like their white counterparts, Black suffragists like Ida B. Wells and Mary Church Terrell could also demand their rights for equal citizenship as women, while also promoting racial equality as African Americans, laying claims for middle-class respectability. In the 60s and 70s, with the rise of the women's liberation movement, fashion again would be used to convey political statements. No one burns bras in the famous No More Miss America protest in 1968, and it is important to remind people that this did not happen, right? But, and in fact, feminists, as you can see, this image from the protest, feminists were actually very much in line with the mainstream fashion of the time. They were not necessarily against femininity. They were more against what they thought the pageant represented and the oppression of beauty culture. And again, the word choice here is important because they thought that every woman have the right to choose their own clothes and what they wear and how do they present themselves, not to be oppressed by these commercial, chauvinistic, right, beauty ideals that they claim the pageant promoted. But if in the early 20th century, right, suffragists emphasized their feminine trait necessarily, feminists in the 70s sought to challenge those gender norms. And many of them adopted more unisex clothes, put pants for women into the mainstream, and turning, again, the pantsuit into a symbol of empowerment, pride, presence of women in the workforce. The fashion industry quickly adopted the unisex styles and marketed them as a new generation of young people who sought to revolutionize not only how they dressed, but also how they lived. And the unisex styles of the 70s, and in particular, the mainstream of the, again, a lost slide, the mainstreaming of the pantsuit for women, as well as the use of the white collar of the suffragists, has been the most enduring legacies of feminism today. And we can see that in this picture. From Hillary Clinton's famously colored pantsuit and pussy hats, to white becoming kind of like the official color of every woman politician in the last couple of years entering offices, fashion has invaded our politics. Indeed, as these examples show us, that contrary to popular myth and also feminism can be, and to some extent always was, fashionable. And these examples also point us to the continuing and constitutive force fashion has in shaping political identities and promoting feminist agendas. By using clothes in political ways, women asserted their sexual freedom, their economic independence, and their racial equality. Yet even those who wore these clothes just because they were fashionable helped to popularize the ideals that these clothes carried. Through fashion, these women facilitated the mainstreaming of feminist ideas in popular culture, even if only in its commercialized version. And as ideas of freedom, independence, and equality became increasingly part of the fashionable discourse, so did feminism. In order to fully understand the impact of fashion statements like the ones we see today, it's important to look at the long history of feminist uses of fashion that my book delineates. In this broader context, which threads together the fashionable practices of women in the past with those of the present, points to the longevity and persistence of the notion that fashion can be empowering, liberating, and enjoyable force in the lives of women. As we pay more attention to the joyful aspects of feminism, we can also reimagine it not only as a constant struggle, but also an appealing everyday practice and a constructive force. While fashion statements, as powerful as they can be, can never replace the full force of organized actions and movements, we should not dismiss the ways in which fashion can open a space for activism and resistance. Whether by legitimizing feminist ideas in mainstream culture, or by creating a common identity among activists, the way we dress matter. By acknowledging the fashionable histories and legacies of the past, we're able not only to better understand feminism history, but also to imagine a fashionable future. So I will end here. If you have any question, I will be happy to answer them. And again, this is my contact info if you want to contact me. And again, reminder of how you can purchase the book, and we'll put it in the chat as well. So yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing you now.
Yeah, thank you so much for your talk. I sincerely apologize for the interruptions. So I'm sorry that that happened, but a smooth recovery on your part. So thank you.
That's fine. That things happen.
So if anyone has any questions, you can feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. Sure, Gloria.
Yeah, very interesting. I really loved it. And, being a senior, I am an example of a lot of the changes in the fashion industry for me personally and professionally, going back to the 60s and the pantsuit and even bell bottoms, was like a big thing. But I can remember when I first got my job in teaching, there were no pants allowed. You were not allowed to wear pants. So you had to wear dresses, skirts. And so the pantsuit was kind of like the compromise because it was pants, but with that blazer, it was acceptable. And then, of course, there was the power suit of the 80s, which everybody had a blue suit. You just had to have power blue, and that kind of like broke the ceiling or whatever, the glass ceiling. But my question is, going back to some of the early things that you were talking about, I'm wondering who was designing this, because it really was dominated by men, wasn't it? In the fashion industry, maybe more in America than in Europe, because I remember, Chanel was like a big deal, but we only had male designers. So were the men realizing that women wanted something different? Were they helpful to that movement?
So actually, I mean, not just in Europe, but the US as well. There's a lot of women designers. They're oftentimes forgotten in the shadows. They're not given credit, right?
Yeah.
But parts of why up until the 30s and 40s, American designers were not known. But
Okay.
because high fashion was in Paris, so we do write about Chanel and about Lanvin, and really the early 20th century. I mean, of course, there are male designers, but it's actually a very much feminine industry, and not just Chanel. There's a bunch of her peers that are women who are very ideologically design clothes for women, by women, kind of like understand, like we women, we know what women want, right? And many of, as the ready-made industry in the United States starting to grow, and really the kind of like the American strength is not in couture, it's in ready-made. Many of the designers are actually women, because they're not being credited, so you can pay them less, right?
Yeah.
And it was an avenue for women, because it was considered to be kind of like a more feminine occupation. It was kind of like it was suitable, and it really by the 30s becoming a suitable career for women. And it really is amazing how quickly women are managed to get positions of power within the industry. And it's really by the 1940s, around 85% of women executives in the United States are holding positions in the fashion industry.
Really wonderful.
So really, yes. So really, I mean, now today it's not necessarily the case, and there is kind of like by this, and interestingly, by the 60s and 70s, where women are becoming when women are entering the workforce and becoming kind of like, as you said, the power suit, right, and entering corporate jobs, men are starting to get in charge of the fashion industry. Although there are women like Donna Karan, Diane from Frensburg, right, who are continuing to this legacies of women designers, of designing women clothes for women by women, and something that really is part of this legacy of sportswear that was very much led by women.
Great, thank you, thank you. I'll tell you, I don't know if people are watching TV or Netflix. There's a series out. I think it's on Prime. Amazon, the Prime Video, but the series is called The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, about a comedian in the 50s. But I love the series for so many reasons, but I'm so intrigued with her fashion because it really was the 50s and 60s. And of course, as an entertainer, she took some liberties with some of the outfits that she wore because she could. But it is a reflection really of, you know, how we were kind of limited to certain outfits that were acceptable, especially if we were housewives or, you know, home. So
Yeah.
very, very interesting. I like it very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have a question?
I do. What was the period? Can you hear me?
Yes.
What was the period when the men would stop at the bus stops just to see the women's ankles? What decade was that? And when did that transition occur? Do you remember or do you know?
I mean, women's ankles were considered, I mean, maybe it's a foreign concept in the 21st century, but women's ankle were considered to be a very sexual organ. That was part of why women were hidden, right? Why women's ankles were hidden under long skirts that did not show. And that is why part of why the bloomer was such a sensation, because it showed women's ankles. This is why short skirts of the bicycle were a sensation, because it did show the boot, right? So it was really only by the 20s when, oh my God, we saw not only women's ankle, but women's knees, that men got used to the fact, right? To the fact that, yes, women also have two legs and they want to use them. So it is kind of like early 20th century, late 19th century, the period when you talk about that, that men are really kind of like, right, like women, seeing women's ankles were today like seeing women's boobs, I guess. It was that sexual connotation. And that was part of why shortening the skirts really became kind of like a cause of the feminist movement. And it's a way of showing kind of like a sexual image. But women faced street harassment, right? Well before the Me Too movement, and in any time. But back then they had like big hats with pins, kind of like a needle pin, and they could just poke the oppressors. So maybe we should bring back that big hats.
We have hat pins at the Chapman Museum, so if anyone needs one. We did have someone ask in the chat if you could put the discount code into the chat.
Oh, sure, yes. It's
Perfect, thank you.
I was wondering if you could talk about the influence of the wars, both World War I and World War II on feminism and fashion. And thank you so much for your work.
Thank you, and thank you for coming. Sure, yeah. Both wars, as all wars, are major influence on fashion and women. I mean, the Civil War was really the start of ready-made fashion because, right, people had to make uniforms for men, and it was really is the point that we can see where the ready-made industry really picks up when at that time was for male only, but wars are always times of change in terms of fashion. World War I certainly, and it's in the midst of, right, also the suffrage campaigns really changed the way women dressed, in the sense that kind of like right after the war we get the flapper, which is a very different silhouette than what we had before. corsets are beginning to disappear, and partly is because women are having some mobilization, not the way that they will have in World War II, but to a certain degree, women are also being enlisted as nurses, as ambulance drivers, and they need functional clothes. So skirts are getting a bit shorter. The silhouette becomes kind of like a bit looser as a way to kind of like for easier movement. And that's not certainly something that, you know, I would be hesitant to say, oh, it happened because of the war, because, but it got more mainstream, more acceptable, maybe because of the war. So the war is not a catalyst as much as it kind of like just, you know, it wasn't a cause for the change of fashion. These changes happened before, but it became kind of like much more obvious and rapid after the war. And World War II is maybe more influence in terms of fashion, just because, you know, the impact was much greater on the home front, and women mobilization into factories, into work. This is the time when pants are becoming at least acceptable as workwear. So many women start to wear overalls, right, to the factories, and these are becoming fashionable. It's not something that you would go to the office with. That will happen in the 70s and 80s. But pants are becoming kind of like more acceptable because women wore them to work, and women went out to work in larger numbers because of World War II. So pants for women as a leisure wear, as a work wear, if you work in a factory, really becomes something that the war did kind of like made popular or made mainstream, made acceptable. So that's kind of like a big change, but really the notion, and that's what you see kind of like in the backlash to the new look, that sportswear are becoming kind of like a staple in women's wardrobes during World War II. And when, you know, French fashion is coming back, and really World War II is a period where the US is cut off from Europe. You know, the Nazis are ruling, the Nazis are in Paris, so there's no communication. They don't know what happens in terms of fashion. And it really is kind of like they're doing their own thing, and American designers are doing their own thing. And when after the war, you know, suddenly those French designers like Dior are coming with those ideas. I mean, you know, newspapers like Vogue or Harper's are kind of like, oh, this is so great. But like American women are like, wait a minute, like, no, we didn't sign up for this. Like, we're staying with our own clothes because that's what we like and that's what's comfortable to us. So there's kind of like, right, what considered to be fashion is not what necessarily considered to be popular. And that's something that the war really kind of like pushed American sportswear into, because that's what they had. They didn't have this connection with Paris. Yes, and the movies as well. Yes, both Katharine Hepburn, Marlene Dietrich, which, right, you know, ironically was German, but they too, and Greta Garbo, another foreigner, but really become kind of like trendsetters in terms of fashion. And they wear the clothes, both the clothes they wear on the screen and off the screen becomes kind of like the fashion of the day. And most of it is sportswear, because they themselves also kind of like, they don't want to wear uncomfortable clothes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hi, this is Jane. I just wanted to interject about sportswear and working clothes for women in the late 30s, before World War II. When my mother graduated from school, she was an Aggie. You know, she traveled around to work with the agricultural workers. And she and all the other gals, they had to wear blue mechanics overalls.
Right.
And it's so cute in the pictures. They have them on with their pearls and their sneakers too. They like, you couldn't get work boots for women. You know,
Yes.
It was really, and my mother used to say, the best news was the pockets. And she swore, now maybe you could check this out. Cameras never had straps till like Margaret Bourke White. And women became prominent because they didn't have, again, that idea of all the encumbrances and camera cases where you could tuck film in because they had no pockets. Men didn't have to worry.
Right. No, pockets, I feel it's still kind of like a uphill battle that we all fight.
We fight. Well, now everybody needs a pocket for their phone. So
Yes, definitely. But you're right, but cameras too. And what's interesting is really World War II, and I mean, it happened really in the Depression, and it's really true that, there was no clothes that were made for women, right? Work clothes or overalls, these were not made for women. And World War II came, and suddenly, we needed all those women in the factories. So designers really kind of like, enlisted to the war effort by designing clothes for women in factories or women in the army. Much of the uniforms are kind of like, not today, but back then, were haute couture, really. Because it was the first time that we're kind of like, oh my God, we have the wax, we have the waves, and all those women are enlisting to the military, and we need to actually supply them with uniforms. So it really was a part of an intentional part of designers to kind of like, so it was really nice to wear kind of like an overall, but an overall that was designed by, a really great designer, a haute couture designer. But so that was something that also World War II really changed.
What is the story behind the girdle? Why did everybody suddenly abandon girdles? I was part of the movement, but I don't know why. I don't remember any reason why I did, but what, is there any specific thing that's attributed to?
I mean, I never wore a girdle, but I heard it was not the most convenient thing. And it is part, right? The way that women substitute corsets for bras in the 1920s, right? We always need support, I guess. And again, I think corsets had, very bad reputation. But it's not always justified. Many women wore corset. There were different kinds of corsets. Corsets not necessarily are a symbol of oppression, but in the 1920s, women did see corsets as a symbol of oppression, and for them it was kind of like, oh, we're getting rid of the corsets and we're adopting the bra. And by the 60s and 70s, right, the girdles becomes kind of like the corsets of the 20th century, and becoming kind of symbol of oppression and of the feminine mystique and kind of like the oppressing 50s that we need to get rid of. But then feminists, right, are going even a step further and getting rid of the bras as well. I mean, they're never burning the bras, but they do get rid of them. Like free the nipple and all those movements, right? So it was about like free the bosom, and you can see kind of like, right, in the late 70s, ideas like the sports bra, for example, are getting in, right? Are the things that that you still need support, but this needs to be comfortable. It needs to be designed with a thinking that women needs to move in them, right? Or to kind of like, God forbid, on them. So really this idea of women starting to do sport seriously also changes, undergarments. This is a very important issue.
I want to know who invented pantyhose, and that person needs to be shot. So there. Did I say that out loud? I'm sorry, but I'm glad that's out. I'm glad that's out. Sorry if you were doing that. What a disaster. Anyway,
yeah.
Just a commentary.
once, I mean, nylon was actually a good invention because let me tell you, wool pantyhose is even worse. So, so at least latex is a good invention. But someone, Linda said that you're right, that today we have a different kind of goals. And it's always kind of like, I think, a cycle, right? We getting rid of the corset and we get bras, and then we get girdles, and then we get rid of them, and then we get something else. So it's always kind of like a constant battle. But I think that the idea of, and the struggle for comfort clothing, that's something that you can really see the continuities of that. And this is why maybe we're still fighting, for pockets, and we're fighting for, I think that after 2 years of working from home, and I don't know how many women will go back to the bras, to tell you the truth, but we'll see.
Does anyone else have some final comments or questions? Well, then I would like to thank our speaker. Thank you so much for putting up with some, uncomfortable disruptions, but you did a fantastic job. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And everyone,
And
look
thank
out
you
for
all
her.
for great questions.
Yeah, and look out for the book. If anyone's interested, all that information should be there. And if you didn't copy down the information, feel free to email me at the museum, and I'll get in touch with Dr. Rabinovich Fox, and we'll get that information for you.